Hello and good morning, everyone, and welcome to your morning briefing for Tuesday, the 3rd of June, 2025. I'm your host, Mike Shelby. And let's go ahead and get into today's domestic roll up items. The White House said today that President Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping will likely talk this week on trade. And this is coming at a time when both are accusing each other of this trade truce violations. China is reportedly going to purchase or announce some purchases of U.S. agricultural products. Great news for farmers. The Trump administration also continues to accuse China of slow walking a part of this mid-May trade agreement to ramp up exports of rare earth materials to the United States. And so far, China apparently has been either slow walking or maybe even blocking some of those permitting process to allow that to happen. Moving on here, Jared, actually, look, I'm not sure if you covered this or not. This tungsten supply chain info. Let's just start with how important is tungsten, which is a metal, correct? How important that to U.S. defense?
Incredibly. Basically, if an airplane's not made out of aluminum, it's made out of tungsten. So your fighters have a considerable amount of tungsten in them. It's also an extremely hard metal. So anything you can imagine that requires a hard, to be harder than steel, it uses tungsten. And you can also combine it with carbon to make a lighter version of it that's almost as hard. It's incredible material. But most importantly, we haven't produced tungsten domestically in 10 years. So the chairman of the House Committee on the Chinese Communist Party found out that Almonte Industries is moving from Canada to the United States, which will make them a primary U.S.-based producer because they also have a tungsten mine going online in South Korea. There's a whole list of questions that Chairman Molinar has for Almonte, but the long and short of it is he wants to know, are you going to sell to us, the United States government, since you make it, and what can we do to make that happen?
Mm-hmm. Well, that would be great news for reindustrialization and trying to build the military equipment we need. Just as a reminder, I don't know why this still sits with me, but one of the most important takeaways from my interview with Michael Every is he said one of the worst things that the United States has done, just in terms of great power politics, is specializing in financial services while China has specialized in production. And we just can't make enough of what we need to potentially beat the Chinese. And pretty incredible. All right, thanks for that, Jared. Let's go ahead and move on here. The Senate is going to start to unveil parts of their spending bill, the big, beautiful bill this week. The Senate Armed Services, Environment, Commerce, and Banking Committees will be rolling out their spending portions of that bill. And Senator John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, says the big, beautiful bill is still on track to be passed by both chambers by July the 4th. All right, moving on here. U.S. retailers are urging Chinese producers to eat the tariffs. Walmart, Target, and other major U.S. retailers are reportedly urging Chinese manufacturers to absorb 50 to 60% of the tariff costs. Walmart and others had previously committed to absorbing those costs themselves. They are, however, under political pressure not to raise prices from the Trump administration. Target CEO said that raising prices is a very last resort. We're hearing this from a lot of people, and they have the United States and China has until the 12th of August, I believe, to negotiate a trade deal before those tariffs return to 145% on Chinese goods. Also, looking over at the Department of Justice, Acting Attorney General Harmeet Dillon, I think she's under Jared. What is she? I think she's under the Civil Rights Division in at DOJ. At any rate, she published a notice that she sent to California, the California Interscholastic Federation in the state of California, that their trans athlete participation policy violates the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, and Dillon gave the state until 5 p.m. on June 9th to change the policy. Moving over to ICE, they released a review of Operation Patriot, which was an inter-service effort throughout Massachusetts. It included the elements from the FBI, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, ATF, Department of State's Diplomatic Security Service, the U.S. Marshal Service, and the U.S. Coast Guard during May, and they nabbed nearly 1,500 illegal aliens, more than half of whom they say had criminal records. We're likely will continue to see that throughout the country. Also, ICE announced that the DHS announced that they will be dedicating more resources and personnel to this ICE tip line to quote, quickly identify, locate, and arrest criminal illegal aliens. And that is in response to this Boulder attack that was carried out by an illegal alien. Also, we move now to our upcoming protests. We're tracking 54 protests today. I think that's double what we had yesterday, more than double, which, again, a couple of months ago would be extremely uncharacteristic. That's just the sustain. This is the most important part to understand. The reason why we're seeing, and most of these protests are going to be tiny, and it's mostly old people. Okay, this is not like 2020 or even 2017 style protests. But building sustained protests is key, because that's kind of the base of your pyramid. When you can turn out millions of people, and groups like Indivisible and 5051 and all the rest, they turned out probably 3 million people, 3 million Americans for that April 5th hands-off march, and then they did another one that was smaller, and like on April 17th. They had May Day, which was fairly lackluster. The next big one is coming up on June 14th. I started talking about this back in April because that's when they were talking about planning it. At any rate, I probably expect another 3 million people. I don't see why it would be smaller than the April 5th protest. So Saturday, June 14th, mark your calendars. Over 2,000 protest events that will take place that weekend. And we're tracking all of them. By the way, one of the cool things about this new intelligence platform that we've built is we've hooked up all these data feeds. And so we just have a much more robust picture of what's going on. And we'll be rolling that out here later this month for everyone. All right, moving on here. FEMA wildfire outlook. Jared, I believe this is your item. Do you have anything to add other than this is June and July, hot, dry months? I mean, you can look at Central Texas. It's just like a perennially bad wildfire season. What else?
Yep. I think that's the biggest takeaway is that, hey, these are over the next couple months, but the Great Lakes regions are also noted here. Normally that's a much wetter region of the country. So if you're up in Minnesota, Wisconsin, UP, pay attention to your surroundings there.
Mm-hmm. And then we look at the Pacific Northwest. Okay, Western Montana, Eastern Oregon, dry, scrub. Okay, it's dry, I get it. But you have Washington State on there, the Northwest Washington State. That's pretty rainy, right? I mean, Seattle's famously rainy.
Yeah, definitely. Well, there have been arson attributed to climate change, right? So it's protest season.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I guess that's a fair point too. There's been plenty of accusations thrown around that really bad well, not just accusations, I think credible accusations that some of these wildfires have been cases of arson. All right, let's go ahead and move on. Just something to keep in the back of your mind here. Move on to the global sit rep. This is interesting. South Korea looks like they're on the verge of electing. This guy has called himself Bernie. He's likened himself to Bernie Sanders. He appears to be the next president of South Korea. We'll just go through the list here. All right, so he has previously warned South Koreans not to become too dependent on the United States. He says he does not want to exclude relations with China or Russia, which kind of makes sense because South Korea has a lot of some economic dependency on China. And this was also, I thought, interesting. He said South Korea, quote, must keep our distance in a China-Taiwan conflict. Jared, you and I have talked before about the role that South Korea may or may not play in a broader war over Taiwan. It looks like this new South Korean president wants to sit this one out.
It looks like that. I don't know how viable that plan is, especially when you consider that China's encroaching on South Korea's maritime territories. And there are a lot of moving parts here. It's very notable that this left-wing president does not say, I want to improve relations with North Korea. So if you're going to become dependent or independent from the United States while maintaining that North Korea as your primary threat, you have to rearm. You have to be considerably more nationalistic. So he can be left-wing, but at the end of the day, his goals appear to be moving in that direction.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I mean, that's been the argument, right? South Korea may not get involved in a conflict with China because they don't. They've got to have all hands on deck for a potential war with North Korea.
Based on what China's doing, though, I don't know that South Korea can actually achieve that. They've been sitting there encroaching into South Korea's fishing territory quite a bit. We've covered that. They're building structures in order to, similar to how they do island reclamation, the Chinese are building structures that would potentially allow them to go, oh, well, this is our territory now. Now move this line back. It's all the same stuff they do down in the South China Sea, but they're doing it up in the Yellow Sea.
Mm-hmm. And didn't they close airspace or some? What exactly did they do? They had some areas closed off that were partially within South Korea's economic exclusion zone.
They had
exclusive economic zone, but then they had one other. Was it a notice to airmen, or what did they do that was fully inside South Korea's EEZ?
So they had 3 different areas they shut off. It was a maritime. It was 3 different maritime areas, but it would have included notice to airmen because these were live fire exercises, so you have to issue a notice to airmen. But one of them, the northern one, was partially in South Korea's EEZ, and the last one, which was not attributed to any military exercise, was entirely within South Korea's EEZ. And that one, I never saw that China actually closed it off. Theoretically, they should have by now. Like, they should have said, yes, we're back to normal traffic here. Mm-hmm. But it was suspiciously close to where China is also building that permanent steel structure.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, intimidation, at least. And with that, Jared, I'll let you go ahead and finish out the global sit rep for us.
All right. So the European Union is no longer going to allow China to participate in European government procurement processes for any medical devices that exceed 5 million euros over a 5-year period, which is fairly easy to exceed. And China's representation to the EU urged that union to uphold free trade and multilateral cooperation as they do. That's kind of a buzz phrase for them. And they're doing this. They're saying that they need to do this as a partnership in the face of unilateral tariff measures. So really, hey, join with us against the United States. Doesn't look like Europe's going to do that, but China's pushing for it. On a similar note of trade issues, the U.S. reportedly gave Vietnam a list of demands during trade negotiations that included reducing its reliance on Chinese industrial inputs and generally tightening its supply chains. Now, this is, I think it's likely to happen because Vietnam's under international pressure for this. It's not just from the United States. India, we covered 3 weeks ago, a month ago. They opened up a new investigation into Vietnam for being a pass-through for Chinese steel. So plenty of other Asian nations are already looking into Vietnam saying, hey, you need to cut this off. I understand you have the deal. You got to cut it off. Moving over to the Middle East, Iran's foreign minister met with his Egyptian counterpart and the director general of the International Atomic Energy Agency. And this was yesterday to discuss Iran's nuclear program. Now, Aragchi, the foreign minister for Iran here, he offered assurances that the nuclear program here is peaceful in nature. It's all just energy. It's not about developing weapons. And he has previously offered inspections, which would come from the IAEA here. But I thought there was an interesting note that he criticized the United States for, quote, turning a blind eye to Israel's alleged violation of the non-proliferation treaty, because Israel reportedly has nukes but doesn't publicly have nuclear weapons. They threaten them. It's probably an open secret, but officially they don't. And I think as long as this continues, Iran's energy program is going to continue to fuel aggression from Israel and thereby instability in the region. And Iran seeking international backing here for its minimum request of allow us to enrich uranium up to the point of energy usage. That way it can pressure the U.S. to concede on that issue, which would finalize these talks. And lastly, but much closer to home, Mexico's Meat Council, which is one of their business bodies there, specifically focused on agriculture and meat, is warning the Mexican government that its current blanket ban on Brazilian chicken could increase their dependence on the United States, which the U.S. is already Mexico's top chicken importer. Now, the council is advising the government to allow imports from regions in Brazil that do not have an influenza infection. That's why this ban exists in the first place. Now, the U.S. and Brazil together make up 20% of Mexico's total chicken consumption. So losing just Brazil wouldn't necessarily, it wouldn't create a shortage, but it would drive up prices. And if they're solely dependent on the United States, this would give American farmers the ability to raise prices. Hey, well, you're not really going to get it from elsewhere. Let's work out a deal. You pay a little bit more, all that.
Mm-hmm. Well, Brazil is the world's largest chicken exporter, followed by the United States. Mexico looks like they've got a pretty good deal situated between the two. All right. Thanks for that, Jared. Let's go ahead and move on to one of our discussion items here. So the Pentagon is allegedly, at least according to the news, looking at plans to redraw the geographic areas of responsibility. And what they want to do is include Greenland in NORTHCOM. That's U.S. Northern Command. It currently sits in EUCOM, which is European Command. According to these reports, Pentagon officials are also considering, and listen, I think maybe these are just considerations. I'm not introducing these as the Pentagon will do this. Some of this sounds kind of extreme, but one of the things, at least maybe they're discussing, is combining NORTHCOM and SOUTHCOM. So U.S. Northern Command, which is Canada, United States, and Mexico, combining that with SOUTHCOM, Southern Command, which is Central America, South America, and the Caribbean. It's a possibility. It seems like that's a massive area for one geographic combatant command. I guess we'll see. One other thing they're talking about is roping AFRICOM back under European Command, which is basically where it used to be before AFRICOM got stood up. And so at any rate, I look at this as a couple of important things. Number one, redrawing the lines to include Greenland in a NORTHCOM, makes sense because there's just so much national security concern about Greenland, number one. Number two, I think it's probably a half step towards claiming U.S. sovereignty or annexing Greenland eventually. I do see that as a half step there. This is politically contentious, especially with the Danish. And then the other thing, too, is Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth has been adamant about downsizing the number of general officers in the military. He wants to streamline decision-making and reduce bureaucratic bloat. And so combining these geographic combatant commands is one way to reduce the number of generals and administrative staff you have. You increase the workload. You don't, you don't get, it's not like you get any additional ISR assets. One of the things that the previous SOUTHCOM commander said, General Laura Richardson, who retired a few months ago, I think, said SOUTHCOM currently has 1% of their ISR needs being met. ISR means intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. So that almost is always going to mean overhead imagery intelligence assets, which is extremely important because you look at South America, Central America, the Caribbean, we're talking about massive drug trade. We're talking about Chinese encroachment. We're talking about Chinese fishing, illegal Chinese fishing off the coast of South America. I mean, it's like these Chinese fishers are just all throughout the Western Hemisphere fishing where they shouldn't be, overfishing, destroying these fisheries as well. With that, Jared, do you have anything just from a naval perspective? I mean, do you have any additional insight here?
I think I do, actually. So I've heard Admiral Paparo mention, he's the commander of Indo-Pacific Command. I think he said his command oversees something like 50, 60% of the world, something like that. It's the largest one by far. So if they were going to consolidate North and South and then Europe and Africa, there's already a framework there for it. That said, I think it would also play well into the idea of Fortress North America, a renewal of the Monroe Doctrine, in order to actually, give. It would not create new ISR assets, but it would change. It would make it considerably easier to maneuver the ISR assets from north to south for the homeland continents, because you don't have to worry about how do I actually change hands for this? It's all under one guy. That would make it considerably easier. I think there is a pathway to do this, and it would be if they do rope Greenland into it in the redrawing of this map. That would, yes, it's a half step, but it would also allow greater control over the Arctic just from the homeland, the guys that are actually reporting directly to the president.
Certainly, and in terms of missile defense or air defense and other radars and batteries, whatever else we're going to throw in Greenland, doesn't it kind of I have zero experience whatsoever with NORTHCOM or with NORAD or anything like that, but it kind of makes sense if we're putting all these sensors and whatever else we're going to put in Greenland. It kind of makes sense that they would be tied under NORTHCOM and have this tie into NORAD, correct?
The biggest thing is it's an easy way to remove red tape, because somebody has to have control over those assets. And if you can just wrap it up under the theater, that's way easier to do than going, oh, well, I have to shift this NORTHCOM asset over to somebody in European Command, get approvals from both chain of command. No, the boss of the America Command, because that's what it would probably be, gets to say, hey, you guys move up here. Plain and simple.
Mm-hmm. Well, I expect this to happen. So thanks for that, Jared. Let's go ahead and move on to I believe our last item of the day. What's going on in Taiwan with energy?
Well, it hasn't been a lot of good news recently, but this, I think, is some good news. So one of Taiwan's primary power providers is warning the government, hey, if we're to meet our 2028 coal-free deadline, you're going to lose 15% of your power supply, and there's no way to replace that right now because Taiwan just went nuclear free. The company is also offering to reassess nuclear power safety measures and stand back up nuclear power because they don't want to see Taiwan's energy grid collapse. Now, as far as why does this matter? An energy instability situation in Taiwan would actually give China a pathway to achieving peaceful reunification, because they could just say, we will turn the power on for you. You just have to come to us. With this push with the reversal of the green energy push that I think we're starting to see here, that will likely prevent China from achieving its goals of peacefully reunifying Taiwan, which would almost certainly result in a loss of American global dominance, because that would allow China to threaten all of our allies almost with impunity.
Sorry about that. All right. Thanks for that, Jared. And I think we will get to some questions here. There's one question about why is Africa Command being rolled into EUCOM? And previously, Africa was split up, I think, into 3 different commands. One of those was European Command. The other was CENTCOM. I don't know, Jared. I don't have any experience with Africa, but it seems like it is logically much more a part of CENTCOM than EUCOM. And maybe you can make the case that there's been so much European influence in Africa, like French and German and Belgian, et cetera, that it's, maybe it falling under EUCOM maybe makes sense.
You mind if I pull the map back up?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay. So right between Europe and Africa is the Mediterranean, and probably not great for all the land guys to hear this, but like the seaways are what matters. So you wrap it up between Europe and Africa because what's there is the Mediterranean. It unites both of them, and that's where all of your main power is going to go. When you build the European African Command, you have to have a strike group in there. You keep it. All of your air power is focused right in Italy. It allows you to actually touch all of Europe, all of really what matters in Africa, Northern Africa. Not to say that Sub-Saharan Africa doesn't truly matter. It's very important for like minerals, but there's not a lot of power projection there. Where from Morocco, you can get right to Spain. You can, if I remember right, you can even see Spain from Morocco and vice versa.
Oh
And
yeah,
we
people
just
land at Gibraltar all the time from North Africa, like in rafts and bathtubs,
yeah.
mattresses.
And to boot, there's if I remember right, there's a small island right in between them as well that serves as an outpost. So like you can make that trip extremely easily from Africa to Europe, and trying to do information sharing there is rough. So you wrap it up together. In addition to that, we just saw with the overthrow of Gaddafi, you can have a migrant crisis right from the center of North Africa into Europe. It's not difficult. All of those security problems for Europe happen from Africa. So you wrap them up together, and now it's one operating picture. It is not two. Mm-hmm. And then it can be controlled by the Navy, who would oversee those migratory flows across the water. As far as like Sub-Saharan versus North Africa, I think what that comes down to is just you don't really want to split the continent. If it weren't for the fact that there's significant mountain ranges, I don't think we would probably split Central Command from Indo-Pacific and European Command.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, ultimately, this is a Pentagon decision, and whoever's involved will live with the effects and the consequences. All right. Thanks for that, Jared. Great, fantastic points. I mean, the Mediterranean, I think, is probably one of the biggest reasons why that would be fall under EUCOM. It just seems to me with everything going on with Russia and Ukraine, it really seems like EUCOM probably has their hands full. I don't know that they actually. Well, we'll see. All right, let's move on to some questions. Could the Russians do a counter container drone swarm attacking the EU power grid, shutting it down and letting migrants do their thing and causing a security overload for EU security? Jared, I think the bottom line is pretty much anybody could do a containerized drone swarm attack now. I mean, it's not like entirely complex to do. Most nation states should either have the capability or be developing that capability. Seems like this is kind of Pandora's box. So could they? Certainly. Yeah, absolutely they could, I think.
Yeah, it's technically feasible. And actually, I was reading a little bit of just after action reports, people that were favorable to Ukraine saying, hey, here's what we learned. And supposedly the Ukrainians just loaded up containers, told a trucking company, hey, this is modular housing, go. And they did. I mean, really, what's preventing somebody like Iran, any I don't know if their separatist force is still in Iraq, but theoretically, like the Kurdish, what's preventing them from doing that to Turkey? This is
PKK or YPG or somebody.
Yes, this is a very low tech technology that allows you to circumvent all kinds of surveillance. Like you're going to have actually have hard borders and inspect every package to make sure there's not a container full of drones now.
Mm-hmm. We inspect, what is it? I think it's less than 1% of all containers coming into U.S. ports are scanned, searched, anything.
Yeah, well, that's not surprising. I mean, if you look at a truly loaded cargo ship, I'd have to double check it, but they're 1,000 feet long, filled to the brim with containers, and then like 4 to 6 deep. You're going to inspect a couple hundred per ship.
They're measured in TEUs, and I would have to go back and I would have to Google search how many containers fit on like a standard TEU cargo ship. But I think in another 5 or 10 years, I think literally anybody could do this if you have the money. It's not a technological issue.
For what it's worth, this same technology type, I have been talking about using containerized missiles for somebody like the Philippines or Yemen to punch way outside their weight. Like the Philippines could actually pose a significant threat to the People's Liberation Army Navy by taking the similar tactic. Just don't fill it with drones, fill it with missiles.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, not just missiles. You could fill it with anything. You fill it with biological or chemical weapons. You could, there are lots of ways. Lots of ways to put weapons in container ships. We'll just say that. All right. Especially because you move them around the world and you expect to see containers on a container ship. All right. At any rate, let's move on. They encourage when everyone's fishing. Is it worse here? I think it's worse absolute worst in the Pacific. but we have seen Argentina get into it. I think we've seen Chile, maybe even Brazil get into it with these Chinese fishing. I mean, it's like a locust swarm, and they'll just go and fish in anyone's, not just international waters. They'll go fish in EEZs, and it's a huge national issue, and it is so bad. It is not only are they overfishing, but they're encroaching on these South American countries' own fishing waters. And I just wonder, why are the South Americans, why are they putting up with it? Maybe it's a capacity issue. They don't have the capacity to do anything about it. But, I think also they like the spigot of Chinese money coming into their country to build out ports and highways and power grids and all these other things that China's been building. I don't know, Jared, you're a Navy guy.
Well, so I think this is really a matter of national security. You're eating primary food supplies for these coastal nations. I think the real reason that we don't see a lot of pushback on this is there is surveillance and international law. You're not allowed to just fire up on these people. They're in international waters. If there was nobody there to monitor it and you could just make a fishing fleet disappear, I think most countries would do it because you're preventing your people from being fed.
Yeah, but some of these Chinese fishing trawlers are not just in international water. They're in exclusive economic zones, or they're actually within the territory of these countries.
EEZs are not considered territory.
Yeah, but it's an exclusive economic zone. I mean, so China can go to any EEZ in the world and just put 1,000 trawlers there and collect up all the fish.
You got to take it up at the courts. But the territorial water stops at 12 miles from your coast. So if it's outside of that, free game. And EEZs go out to 200 miles. And those are considered international waters for that, 188 miles. So, yeah, they can encroach there. I think part of the question was Chinese encroaching on everyone's fishing. Is it worse in South Korea? It would be, just because they're, unlike what you're seeing in Chile and Argentina, China's not pushing territorial claims there. They are trying to push that in the Yellow Sea.
Mm-hmm. All right. Let's move on. Next question. We've previously discussed China's presence in Greenland. Has that situation changed? Are we working to remove their presence there? Jared, this is not something I've looked at. How about you?
Last I saw was the minerals minister, I think it was, or the mining minister from Greenland we covered last week. She's put a lot of halts on Chinese mining. The presence is still there, but the operations appear to generally be slow, if not halted. So no improvement. It did sound like, remember what we covered? She said, hey, Europe, America, I want you to invest in this sector so that we don't have to go to them, and we will go to them. That sounds to me like she's trying to play hardball and say, hey, improve our situation so we don't have to depend on the Chinese.
Well, I think inviting Chinese investment into Greenland is probably a really good way to be taken over by the United States, frankly.
Yeah, you want to be part of the NORTHCOM? We'll make you part of the NORTHCOM.
Yeah. All right. Ben, listen, my outlook on Russia's possible use of nuclear weapons hasn't changed. It is possible. I don't think it's likely. Jared?
I'm maintaining the 10% inside of Ukraine's borders just because until Russia can actually say, yes, we have 95% effectiveness drone coverage in these areas, all of their nuclear triad is under threat except for the mobile ICBM launchers, which I noticed was the only set not listed as attacked. All of their stationary assets were attacked. Well, semi-stationary assets, they have bases where the TELs don't.
Well, on that topic, does Russia have the capability or capacity to build new strategic bombers to replace the ones that were destroyed?
I think so. They're maintaining an industrial capacity to fight a war, and materially they appear to be ahead. Whether or not they can do it at the same rate they have done it, I don't know.
All right. with China's attempts to reintegrate Taiwan, what are the odds of Russia hitting Japan at the same time? I know that there are territorial disputes between Russia and Japan, but this is a Jared question.
Russia threatens it every once in a while. They like to bring it up anytime they think Japan gets uppity. But try to imagine Russia fighting another two-front war. I don't think it will actually go well for them. And Japan is no slouch. They would be fighting a naval battle, and all of their naval assets are within striking distance from Japan.
All right, Steve Bannon says we're, the thing that is all, it seems to me, just from a sea power perspective, Russia's fleets are divided between three bodies of water that are just, they're not exactly connected. Part of the year they're not connected because it freezes over, and so this has been a really difficult for Russia to amass sea power because they have what, three or four main fleets, Jared?
Effectively three. If I remember right, St. Petersburg has one up there. It's in their little satellite state near the Baltics. You're right. Yeah. For a few months out of the year, the North Fleet doesn't touch the Pacific Fleet, so good luck getting reinforcements there. And the Pacific Fleet's on Vladivostok, which is very nestled between the Korean Peninsula and Japan. Like, if Japan wanted to, they could wipe out the Pacific Fleet extremely easily.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what I'm getting at. I don't think Russia wants a two-front war with Japan and NATO, which is probably what that would spiral into. But
oh yeah.
All right. Steve Bannon says we're much closer to the brink of World War III than people realize. The press is complicit in allowing this to spiral. How do you assess the present risk of a global nuclear conflict? I still say pretty low. I don't think it's in anyone's best interest. I don't presume to know what Vladimir Putin or anyone else believes or is planning to do, Shoigu, whoever. Jared, anything different?
Globally, I think it's extremely low, almost not even on the table. Just who benefits from that?
Yeah, I mean, well, really, what would be the trigger for mutually assured destruction? All right, should the silence that we're hearing from Russia over the Ukrainian drone strike, more or less, be a cause for concern on the part of the U.S.? Is this them taking time to figure out who to retaliate against and in what way? I would expect so. I mean, I thought Russia obviously has to do something. I think I would not want to be in Kiev right now. I'll tell you that.
No. Actually, I was just looking at a map this morning from that. The Russians pushed into Chernihiv, which is only a little bit north of Kiev. So that appears to be part of the response. As far as I knew, the Russians were not coming down from Belarus into northern Ukraine anymore, but here they are. The total response will take time to develop, actually practice, and then go through with. But it does look like they're at least doing low-level pushes into parts of Ukraine that we haven't seen in a while.
Mm-hmm. All right. Next question here. Palantir is involved in a large-scale federal data project of the Trump administration, aims to centralize records from various agencies, including the IRS, Social Security. Are you concerned? Yes, it is always concerning when the federal government tries to consolidate or centralize data on American citizens in that way. My general read on this is, I don't like it. I definitely don't like the Palantirs doing it, number two. But number three, and I'm not trying to justify it, but from my perspective, it looks like they're trying to centralize all these records and figure out where waste, fraud, or abuse is occurring, tying IRS records to Medicare eligibility or Medicare payments, and looking at all this data, trying to figure out who's on the government dole and who probably doesn't need to be on the government dole. Because what I imagine is you have all these different databases that don't talk to each other, or they don't easily share information back and forth. And if they do, it's on a one-for-one basis. Like, we're looking at one individual at a time. That's what I got from it. I have not done a deep dive into it, but it looks like they're trying to probably weed off some Americans who are getting paid by the federal government who probably should not be getting paid by the federal government. But and Doge has talked about implementing AI and upgrading what this does. So this probably means more IRS letters are going to be going out, and more systems maybe scrutinizing your connection to federal payments. That's what it looks like to me. Which is not to say that I have this article up on Substack. I didn't write it. I need to read it. And this is something that I've talked about on the show and thought a lot about too. I mean, realistically, we're 3.5 years away from doing a political 180 in this country. And everything that Doge is building or is being accused of weaponizing could just be weaponized by the next party in charge. So yeah, obviously. Anytime the federal government does anything that appears to be good for one party in power, you just have to assume it will eventually be used by the next party in power. So yeah, of course it's concerning. Why hasn't Russia killed Zelensky yet? Well, I mean, that's a great question. I think previously that maybe they've not wanted to make him a martyr. That would probably increase international pressure against Russia. Maybe. But I doubt it's a problem that the Russians can't get to him, frankly. I mean, just my take.
Realistically, the Russians could probably get to him. There's been more than a few times where he's been out in Kiev, so like just drop a missile. I do think so. There's a pretty consistent rotation of Western politicians. That may also be why basically they haven't had a chance, not because they don't know where he is and couldn't do it, but because there's collateral damage there that's unacceptable.
Maybe that's another reason. All right, how would World War III help or hurt multinational companies? Well, it would definitely hurt them. We're talking about a cessation of global trade in many cases. We're talking about, I mean, if people thought 2020 and 2022 were bad for commodities and global trade, I mean, this would be worse. The United States gets 20% of its 20% of its imports from China, another 20% from the greater Indo-Pacific. We're looking at potentially up to 40% of all U.S. imports stopping. So in terms of multinational companies, I don't know if you're in digital services that has to do with national security, it'd probably be great for your company. If you're making widgets in China and trying to export it to the United States, it'd probably be really bad for your company. So I don't know. Vague question, vague answer, but I hope I don't know exactly what you're looking for. All right, Jared. Next question. We'll get to the last couple ones. We'll jump off. All right. Why would Russia stand pat while their nuclear strike capability is systemically dismantled? I don't know that I would say that Russia is standing pat. I think that, that drone strike, it's not like it occurred over days. I mean, it was like a fairly rapid strike and then it was over. My assumption is that they just didn't, it was a total surprise. And those drones were launched from very short proximity to these military bases. So this is not like they saw them coming for hundreds of miles or something like that. I mean, it was like they popped out of that container and then several moments later, they were there. So I don't know, Jared, I wouldn't say the Russians are standing pat necessarily.
I wouldn't either. Even Ukraine was saying, yeah, we went to properties adjacent to where we intended to target and then launched. Like the Russians would have had at max 5 minutes of warning. And that's seeing a drone go up and then having to do something about it when you don't have drone defenses here, because these are strategic assets that are not supposed to be targeted and are not in use in this war. Like a lot of people like to say, oh, this is complex. How could Ukraine pull this off? Well, actually, it's fairly simple. They know where they are. They know they're relatively unguarded because they're not being used. You just go there and you do it. But the thing is, you're crossing a line.
Yeah, it's like that Karl von Clausewitz quote, everything in war is simple, but the simplest things are complex, or something like that. So.
Yeah. He says not responding with asymmetric force. Man, it has been, 36 hours?
Yeah, I would give, I I think we live in this era. Like you look at the Israelis and Iranians, and you think like, oh, within the next 24 hours, Russia's going to launch something back. And I don't know. I think if you're the Russians, you want something calculated, some counter value target. You lost some strategic air assets that are critical to your national security and force projection. What is a strategic target for Ukraine? What is the counter value target? Not just a response of like, oh, hey, we're going to bomb some buildings and oh, we showed you. It's like if you're Russia, you probably want to inflict strategically vital targets in Ukraine. I don't know what that would be that Russia has not already been targeting.
If they could get away with if they could get away with no Western casualties, I think it's Luhansk where most of Ukraine's material support runs through. So if you wanted to wipe out a strategically important target, that eastern or western city in Ukraine is the way to go. Go wipe that out and tell them you're coming to the table.
Isn't a lot of this NATO munitions and equipment stuff still being moved by rail from like Romania into western Ukraine?
I don't know if it's going from Romania. The last I saw is a lot of it was moving from Poland. I can check Romania. I don't know if there's anything even feasible there because there's Transnistria. That's an issue.
Well, we know. Well, okay, through Poland or wherever. That's fine. And listen, I don't pay attention to the Ukrainian war every day, but I wonder why some of those rail lines are still there.
That's probably the same answer as the why haven't they shot Zelensky? Well, he's got Western protection by having politicians around him all the time. I know the NATO troops are moving it to at least the border. If they are moving it past the border, okay, do you shoot NATO troops inside of Ukraine? Like, yeah, technically they're in a war zone, but at the same time, they're still NATO troops.
Well, that has been our key assumption. I remember talking about this with Max, and we went around the horn on this because we go back to like Vietnam, and one reason why the United States were not attacking Vietnamese radar installations because we knew that there were Soviet advisors there. We didn't want to kill the Soviets because we didn't want to bring the USSR formally into that conventional conflict. Russia has a similar position. Russia knows there are NATO troops in Ukraine, and maybe that's one reason why is because Russia doesn't want NATO to get more involved, or if they don't want a full-scale war with NATO. I mean, I guess there's the risk that if NATO potentially, I don't know if they could invoke an Article 5 about losing troops in like a Russian strike in Ukraine. Honestly, I think there's a near one. And again, this is not my domain, but I think there's probably a near 100% likelihood that Russians have killed NATO troops in Ukraine, period. So, all right. At any rate, last thought, Jared.
No more thoughts on that one.
Okay, fantastic.
We've been stuck on the Russian one.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for watching. That's going to do it for today's morning briefing. We'll be back in your inbox tomorrow morning, back on the show starting at 08 Central Time. Until then, be well and stay out front.